Thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it. I'd like to also take just a moment to introduce myself. So I'm Marla Sofer. For those who don't know me, I'm the founder of Knomee and founded Knomee after 22 years deep in wealth and asset management. Was a private banker and then spent a lot of time in investment operations at JP Morgan and BlackRock. And then a decade ago, jumped into fintech, very inspired by how can tech do better for our clients? How can we make sure that financial services evolves to meet the needs of our clients in an effective way? So ran partnerships at a couple of fintechs and financial services strategy at Microsoft until I realized that there's a lot of information we don't know about our clients. And so we're a bit hamstrung as an industry as it relates to personalization. So that is what Knomee is solving. We help advisors differentiate and deliver much more personalized solutions by guiding clients to share information in a way that is actionable and meaningful and lucrative for advisors as they grow their business. So I'd like to take a moment also to introduce Gary. Gary, if you don't mind taking a second just to introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Gary Maier. I've actually been on the street longer than Marla has. I'm quite sure. And started my career at Drexel Burnham way back when. And when Drexel went bust, I was the 20th person hired over at BlackRock, which was called Blackstone Financial Management back then. I was the person who ultimately came up with the Aladdin platform, initially as a skunkworks project, and built that out, and was there for a number of years, and then left BlackRock, became CTO at a number of hedge funds, before returning to BlackRock for a second tour of duty after they had completed the BGI and Mellon acquisitions, and I was in charge of global engineering at that point. And then one of my early BlackRock colleagues from the first tour of duty left and became the CEO of investment management at BNY Mellon. He brought me along with him to become the chief information officer in charge of asset and wealth management at the bank, and had a great time doing that, followed by a stint in a similar capacity over at UBS in charge of global asset management technology there. And then decided that my view is the industry had generally lagged in terms of its adoption of digital, and thought, given my background, I was somewhat uniquely qualified to be able to help folks on that journey. And I launched a consultancy, Fintova, which was focused primarily on the investment management sector and helping firms modernize their technology estate. And then most recently, over the last few months, launched CAMP, which is an Agentic AI orchestration platform that's been purpose-built for regulated industries like finance and wealth management. And we're going to market now, and we're starting to get a ton of traction. So we're really happy about that.
Fantastic. So as you can see, those of you who have known me or known me for a while, and I see some friends here, thanks for joining. Few people understand architecture and real world application of intelligent systems in wealth and asset management like Gary. So I'm super excited to have him here on this Wealth Leadership Roundtable. This is going to be an interactive chat. So our first ask for you is in the chat, if you don't mind. Please put in a word that comes to mind, something, a phrase, anything that you think of when you think of AI and wealth. What is the first thing that you think of? The stakes for today and what we're going to be talking about is how AI isn't just hype. It is a tipping point for advice, engagement, trust building. We're going to be talking about what agentic AI means and what it means to wealth as an industry, what it means to the client experience and advice delivery, how it relates to compliance, data, trust, and control, and how our tech choices today are going to differentiate scalable firms from stagnant firms. So obviously, this also has a lot to do with the intergenerational transfer of wealth. It has to do with this wave of technology that is accelerating at this unbelievable pace. And then and we'd love to get a lot of your input on what are wealth's biggest challenges and how AI is presenting itself to solve those biggest challenges. Okay, so next interactive task, and thank you for those who went into the chat. If you don't mind raising your hand or in the chat, what are the biggest problems that you are facing today in your wealth firm? And as you consider that, we can offer you a little bit of room to think. Some of the things that we hear a lot, and I speak to wealth managers all day long. I know Gary speaks to them a lot. It is engagement. It is scale. It is making sure that for your 300th client, you're offering the exact same high bar of experience as you are for your first client and your second client. The client expectations that are evolving so rapidly, the intergenerational transfer of wealth, the recent Capgemini research that came out and said that 81% of heirs plan to fire their parents' advisor. Digital experiences. You know which experiences you love on your app, and you know which ones you hate. I can tell you, I recently went through hiring an advisor and went through financial planning systems a couple of times. It's painful. It's pretty painful to come on as a new wealth management client, and so we know what those are. Retiring advisors, succession, planning for the next generation as it relates to your staff. Okay, I'm going to read off some of those that are in here. All right, saving time, efficiency. So that's kind of definition of AI. Advisor recommendations. Ksenia, do we mean also like referrals, kind of getting referrals and growing your business?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right, growing your business, automation, fewer employees, so more optimization and efficiency. So maybe that is if an advisor used to cover 50 clients, can they now cover 350 clients? Custom automation, so having different experiences for different client use cases. Is that what we're referring to? I can call you iPhone. Yes? Custom automation, or do we mean taking a technology and customizing it based off of the different companies it's delivering through? Is it at the client level or at the company level? And the answer may be both. I want to start off as we think about these challenges, and thank you everyone who is jumping in here with some input. One of the things coming from this backdrop of asset management is seeing how asset management over the last 2 decades has really become somewhat commoditized, and there was a race to the bottom on pricing. When you think of the largest ETFs haven't been around that long, 30 years, and they started off as this passive allocation. They have grown like wildfire, and at one point, maybe about 15 years ago, Vanguard decided to charge pennies on the dollar for their ETF, which everyone then had to follow because there was very little differentiation in the types of products they were exposing. There's an argument to be made that wealth is heading in that same direction, that the products that we have to deliver are pretty similar from one company to the next. Some companies might have a bigger menu. Now every company can have a big menu. If it's not directly, it's through partnerships with other companies that can also offer private allocations, real estate, crypto, insurance policies, estate plans, tax optimization, even doing your taxes themselves. All of those things are possible. So how do we continue to differentiate? Differentiation is something that continues to come up when I speak to wealth managers day in and day out. Even at the ultra high net worth and family office space, we're talking about customization and how it's challenging to continue to provide that across a complex household at scale. Gary, if you don't mind, chime in a little bit with what you've been hearing from the industry on the pain and the experiences that wealth is delivering versus what they'd like to deliver.
Yeah, well, I mean, going back to your initial point first about the commoditization of asset management, which is, to your point, a byproduct really directly, I think, of the proliferation of ETFs. Now the ETFs have diversified. They're no longer just very simple equity asset allocation, models, but they are largely still passive or semi-passive strategies. And it's interesting, I don't know if you know this or not, but the beginning of this year, 2025, even though you could see the trajectory that passive was having versus active, this is the first time ever that passive inflows have exceeded active inflows. And so there's more money being managed in passive strategies today than there are in active strategies, which is the first time ever. So the handwriting was on the wall for a really, really long time. And the thing that it reflects within the wealth management world is that, people need to move, and this means really the providers as well as the ultimate consumer need to transition from products to solutions, because solutions are much, much further up the value chain than products are. And as products are increasingly commoditized, right, it's the solutions, it's the client experience, it's the objective-driven investing and outcomes that you can derive for your clients that really is going to be the differentiator. And it's going to be a differentiator that has been in place largely for the ultra-high net worth and family office segment, but has not been in place for down market segments. And that's what's going to change. And that's really where the scale that and the capability that data and AI can introduce into these organizations is really a game changer, because you'll be able to offer objective-driven investing for clients that are, mass affluent, which you could not do before because of the workload. I've seen a lot of comments here, fewer employees, automation, productivity, all these things that were not previously possible without throwing more bodies at the equation are going to be doable with the impact that AI is having on the street. And so you really need to think about what that means for your operating models. How is that going to transform your operating models? How is it going to transform the way in which you go to market, the way in which you service your clients? What's happened with wealth management, particularly in those lower tier segments, is that the business has largely become one of asset gathering rather than asset management. And so, you're collecting assets on behalf of a client. The client is being deployed into a model portfolio, which may or may not be aligned with their personal objectives, right? And for that privilege, they're paying 100 to 150 basis points. And that's just not a sustainable model, especially as clients begin to see the opportunities, they begin to see, what's out there, they demand more, and they're becoming more price conscious. As Marla said earlier, asset management has already been a race to the bottom. There's no reason to expect that wealth management will be any different.
Can we take a moment now, Gary? I want to see if we can launch our first poll. What we want to ask about is which part of client engagement feels the least scalable when you think about these new operating models. Oh, excellent. The poll worked. I'm so excited. And then, Gary, as we're getting the answers on this poll, let's see if everyone sees it. And Rich is already weighing in here. Meetings are not scalable, it sounds like. Do you mind giving everyone a little bit of an education? Can you define agentic AI and talk a little bit about how it learns, adapts, it acts in accordance with how it's trained?
Yeah, well, the best way to think of it is as a team, right? So, at camp, we like to think of the human dynamics that we're trying to sort of emulate, right? So a project team typically has a manager who provides oversight, who sort of has the overall big picture, in their heads, and then is recruiting people to execute various tasks that ultimately deliver against that objective. And agentic AI is very much the same type of thing, except with AI agents. So you may have sort of a manager AI agent who is coordinating all these different inputs and outputs that it's deploying to downstream agents that are more task oriented, right? And in order to be able to execute those tasks, they have to interface with tools, just like humans do, right? So whether it's a word processor or it's a CRM system or it's, an accounting system or a trading system, ultimately those agents have to be able to interface with the tools. And all of this collectively is done through what's called orchestration. So that's basically taking, workflows and identifying, here's how something flows through a system. This particular party, agent or human, is going to do this particular action. This action relates to this one. It has these different dependencies, and all of that comes together in a workflow. Again, very, very similar to the way in which human project teams are managed. And that's at a very high level, that's really the promise of agentic AI. But of course, it's doing it with machines instead of with humans, and so therefore is inherently more scalable and of course cheaper to run.
As we're wrapping up on this poll, I wonder if anybody is willing to come off of mute and turn on your camera for a moment and give a little bit of context. Why did you answer as you did? As you just heard a little bit about agentic AI and you're thinking about scalability, why did you select that particular answer?
Happy to see personalization was the number one thing. I would agree with that, actually.
Same. Rich, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, it's our biggest challenge right now. I mean, Emily does all the planning meetings and I do all the investment meetings, and there's only so many you can do and prepare for. We're using AI right now to prep notes, and we're hoping that gets better with our CRM going forward, but we don't have any data flow among our systems to be able to pull here from here. And we would like to create a standard template meeting, which we already have, but we're doing it by hand. We'd love for AI to do our meeting note prep for us so we can just jump in 15 minutes before and go, yeah. Query anything we're missing. Let's go. Right now, we're spending an hour to 2 hours doing that with internal team, and it would allow meetings to be a little bit less onerous. But the client, one of our apps is talking about creating an AI version of us that we can, a video of us, an avatar looks just like us, can answer questions 24 hours a day through our app. And I don't know if our clients are really going to dig that. So I don't really know how we're ever going to solve that. You can only do so many, I only have enough energy for so many meetings in a day. So,
hey, Rich, what segment do you typically service?
we're in the $1 to $5 million tech professionals with equity comp, and we have clients coast to coast because we're virtual.
So you're trying to handle a lot of clients with basically a small staff.
Mm-hmm.
Agents for operations, agents that actually help with data, pushing from here to there, loading here, making it customized in your workflow, but not agents for you. Like that's
Right.
kind of maybe something that the client might think is a step too far. So you as kind of your digital twin being kind of the agent of Rich facing off directly with a client might not be step one in agentic AI.
Mm-mm.
Got it.
No.
Does that resonate for others? I'm just curious. You can put in the chat, raise your hands. Thank you, Rich, very much for coming off mute and on camera and sharing why you answered as you did. Very helpful. And I liked also the answer of meetings and recognizing that meetings are very challenging to scale. They're time consuming, not only to have to prep for, to drive. Frank, did you want to chime in with something as well?
Yeah. I mean, I thought it was personalization because, by definition, every individual is unique, right? And so, as much as we like to scale, and that's a word that I always have trouble with, because when you reference how unique individuals are, it's hard to scale people. And so, you can scale niches and kinds of people and target audience and target class. And so you get people in kind of that are similar. But when it comes down to actually being solutioning for problems, it's totally unique. So I'm always a believer, having done this for a long time, that lots of times advisors really get focused on what they want to say as to what, rather than what the clients want. And so all the time I've spent in the past in meetings, I could have spent a tenth of the time on the meetings, and if I just focused on really where the client was at. And with the advent of AI, all the technical research you'd have to do to support those problems all going to be done for you. And we do it now on the tax side. We do it now on the estate side. I mean, all you have to do is put it into a chat and you get the answer with citations, with everything. So that's not the issue. So, if you can sit there and listen and be comfortable with saying, I don't know the answer, but I'll get back to you, it'll cut your prep time in half.
We have a client also who recently shared with us, it's not only that the advisor is talking about what they want to talk about, it's sometimes that the client is saying what they expect the advisor wants to hear. Have you experienced that as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah. As opposed to kind of saying, here's what you don't know about me. And frankly, there's not really a setting that I feel comfortable sharing it with you. So I'm just going to tell you what I think you need.
I mean, a good example is, we used to do people do goal setting sessions. They send out a questionnaire and people say, what are your goals, and houses and marrying, weddings and all this. And I had a client for 4 or 5 years, and they told me they really wanted to reconnect with a past relationship. And I said, how come you never told me that before? And he said, well, it wasn't on the list. I mean,
Things change. Things change.
that's not on the list, and I didn't think to put it in other. It's kind of like, you can't cookie cutter these things. You just can't.
I think there's another element to it also, Marla, right? Which is, everyone's talking about a lot of the meetings. I mean, the most, especially at the larger shops, right? Typically, the RIAs are going to meet with their clients during an onboarding process where they're collecting their information and data and objectives and so forth. And then more often than not, again, particularly for those down market segments, it tends to be a very reactive channel. So what's happening with the market? What's going on with my portfolio, right? Rather than one that's more proactive. Hey, we see that, this is something that you might have interest in, or this is something that you're doing. And, this is what's happening with your portfolio that we see that might require maybe a different approach to what we're taking. And so that's sort of the client service, rather than the client sort of engaging you when they're angry or they're concerned or they're worried or whatever else about something, which probably is, particularly for that mass affluent and even high net worth segment, is probably represents 90+% of the conversations.
Yeah, I want to ask a little bit here of this roundtable. I want to pivot a little bit into structure, infrastructure, security, privacy, ability to actually embed new technology to help drive this future of personalization, and constraints. So what is holding you back? And I wonder if we can launch the next poll and see what your answers are on what are the biggest constraints to adopting new AI tools. And I'm curious how you'd answer that. One of the things that I think we're all facing is there are so many apps popping up everywhere that are scraping data and trying to tell you predictions of your client might be going through X, or a propensity model that they may be, selling their business or going through a divorce or having a baby, or even that they're ready for wealth management as a service or not. The challenge with that, and particularly in Europe, California, New York, those that have regulatory environments that care about care more about data privacy, consumer protection, security, is how do you balance the way that your infrastructure is pulling information from your client in a way that is, for the client's perspective, not surveilling, not invasive, doesn't feel creepy, and is also getting deep into the types of information that help you deliver a better service to them. And this kind of also goes into the constraint. Is compliance a constraint? It looks already as though for many people, compliance is a constraint to AI. Gary, can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing there? And when you think about agentic AI, I think everyone kind of thinks about OpenAI and Anthropic and Claude, and what they're basically doing is they're scraping the web. Any question you might want to ask, they're pulling out public information and they're spitting out whatever they think you want to hear. That's great. But when you're serving a client, how does that relate to AI, privacy, security, compliance, and risk?
Yeah, well, the problem is they're not just scraping the public information. They're learning from whatever information you feed into them at the end of the day as well, right? So, we've encountered a lot of firms, particularly the smaller shops, that haven't really given much thought to some of those security and control risks and regulatory risks that they're confronting when they feed PII data into a model. So one of the things that we've done with CAMP, in fact, the whole reason for CAMP at the end of the day was because we saw a ton of opportunity, and the technology capabilities of AI have been nothing short of impressive. My view is that this is the beginning of the next industrial revolution, basically. And so, not to downplay that, but security, governance, and control has largely been an afterthought today. And we saw that as an opportunity within the regulated world, where that was required. It was table stakes to be able to really use AI in a meaningful way. So it's important to make sure that that your approach, that your data architecture, that your governance, that your security is all up to snuff rather than just tossing data freely into a AI model. That's number one. It's important to make sure also that you're able to integrate your data across different systems and applications and sources. I think one of the limitations that firms are going to face is, everybody and their mother right now is coming out with an AI capability within an application endpoint. And so, wealth firms, just like many other firms, have lots of different applications that are, very fragmented, very poorly integrated. And so if you have an AI agent sitting inside of each one of these different applications, but they don't communicate with each other in any meaningful way, and you haven't really sort of built that substrate, beneath them that carries all of the relevant data, you're really not going to get a ton of use out of that over time. And so we believe that the data architecture is the number one critical ingredient to being able to be successful with this and to really move the needle forward. And part of that data architecture is ensuring the security and the governance and the controls around that data. And that's a really important consideration.
As we were just talking about kind of compliance, data infrastructure, risk, privacy, if anybody has any questions, please let me know. I'll give it just 30 seconds here.
Yeah, this is Charles. Sorry I can't be on camera. I'm actually driving, but I did want to chime in. My answer to that question was integration risk. But I look at integration from a different perspective, not with other tools, more so with our individual business practices. What I'm finding is most solutions have a tailored way of doing business and doing things, and they try to steer you to an outcome that's prescribed versus giving us, the advisor, the latitude to design the client journey the way that we historically have been doing business. So the biggest challenge that I'm finding now is finding tools that give me the insight I'm looking for, make my job more efficient, but allow me to adapt it to fit my model and put in my way of doing things into it, so that the client experience coming from me, the individual advisor, versus it's coming from a computer or a technology system.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great point. I mean, and sort of gets back to the fact that, when you're inside of a captive system, there's a certain way of doing things, right? And I've always architecturally, and this is well before AI sort of, took the spotlight, I've always believed that if you're going to own anything, right, firms don't necessarily all have the technical competencies to go out and build their own systems that are aligned with their workflows and their processes, the way they do them or the way they like to think of things. And so you're basically left leveraging whatever vendor capabilities there are and the workflows that they impose on your process. And that's just part of the, part of the agreement basically that you have when you bring one of these on. But if you own the data that's feeding into and coming out of those, and again, you sort of separate that data layer from the actual application functionality, and now you apply AI to that data without being constrained by the application, again, workflows and logic and so forth, right? You have a lot more flexibility in terms of how you want to deploy that, and and what kind of information and actions you can take on that. And that's a really, I can't emphasize it enough, an incredibly important technology and architectural decision that you want to make up front, is not to be held captive to a particular application endpoint, because those application endpoints, and they may be difficult to unwind, for firms that are on them for a really, really long time. But at the end of the day, they age. There's something that comes along down the road. You want to replace it, right? Owning your data and making sure that you're able to integrate that data across all your different functions is critically important. And it's especially important for AI, because that's what AI feeds off of. Data is the lifeblood of the entire process.
I want to also chime in on something that you said, Charles. I think also resonates in that it is the business process itself that can be the differentiator. The reason that a client is working with you versus another advisor, another planner, might be that they like your process, and your process is unique. And the way that you want the integration to work has to work in your system, your system for prospecting, referrals, and then intake, and then the plan, and then the allocation, or whatever it may be. But there is a process that you go through, and that process may be really bespoke. And so when you think about your process, I think it is the opposite of kind of being captive. And I know we have a lot of independence here. I don't think there may be some wirehouse advisors here as well, but that is often one of the biggest differentiators and what leads a lot of advisors to leave, as you guys know. It is that they don't want to be held captive to not only a particular process, but also a particular compensation model or a particular set of products that you may or may not sell, or are incentivized to sell or not. And so it is that differentiation in process, product, and approach that really guides and drives your own brand of advice and the way that you're personalizing. One of the questions that has come up for us is how the impact of your decisions today as it relates to managing, simplifying, creating efficiencies in personalizing that process can have an impact to you down the road. So what are some of the decisions that you're seeing today, Gary, that may have this massive impact 2, 5, 10 years down the line that advisors should be aware of as they're thinking about their experimentation with new tools? Which are those that they should be more wary of as it relates to their own ability to control for the brand of experience and personalization that they're providing?
I think if I were to sort of the impact that AI is going to have generally to the industry, in one sort of quick phrase, right? I would say it's a transition from task automation to outcome automation, right? And part of that is the client experience, and that's actually a really important part of it at the end of the day, because it's those relationships that you build, that you nurture over time as you get to know your client, and that you can maximize. Again, the more information that you have about the client, the more proactive you can be with that client rather than reactive. All that feeds into the sustainability of that relationship, and quite frankly, even as the generational transition happens, you have a much better shot of holding on to those relationships and those assets, if you know the family, if you know the people that you're dealing with, right? And I think that, as I mentioned before, the decisions that are made today around how you're going to use AI, the architecture that you're going to deploy around it, and I'll say it again, I said it just before, but making sure that your data is somewhat separate from the underlying applications that are supporting that data or generating that data is a critical consideration when you're building this stuff. That's the number one thing. And then the second part of course, and we talked about this as well, is just it's the security of that information. How you use that information, what kind of experience. I'll give you an example. This is from the asset management world, but a number of years ago, I was speaking at a conference, and I had the chief investment officer of one of the very large top 5 asset management shops approach me afterwards. And the point that I made in my presentation was that client experience was the new alpha. And this was a comment that I made probably about 10 years ago or so. And so the CIO approaches me afterwards and he goes, no, it's not client experience, it's performance, So I said, okay, well, let's take that straw man and use it for a second. I said to him, are you an Amazon Prime member? And he said, yes, I am. Okay, well, why are you an Amazon Prime member? And he starts going off and he says, well, because they have an easy RMA process, and they've got audio and video that I can use, and 2-day shipping, and all these sort of affinity benefits of Amazon Prime membership. And I said to him, not once did you mention price. And the reality is that prices aren't always the cheapest on Amazon. And price is the closest economic corollary to investment performance. But you didn't mention it once. You talked about the personalization. You talked about the client experience. You talked about the user satisfaction. That's what you talked about, right? And the truth is, there are very few, if any, asset management firms that I'm aware of that are consistently top quartile performers quarter after quarter. Rarely happens, right? And so client experience, user experience is absolutely going to be the critical ingredient. And it's critical for asset management. And I would argue it is even more critical for wealth management at the end of the day. So making sure that you're using AI in a way that maximizes that is really important.
So we've talked a lot about data. We've talked a lot about experience, security, privacy, structure. I want to come back to what we raised at the very top of the hour, the challenges for wealth and how they can actually look at delivering these different nuanced, fantastic, off the charts client experiences, and how they can be thinking about taking first steps toward that. So I also want to launch another poll. This is a slightly different poll, but when's the last time you discovered something new about a long-term client? How often are you refreshing and gathering net new information that is the ingredient to continuing to drive that engagement and emerging, ongoing, exciting experience that clients are going to be demanding of you ongoing? So I wonder if when we think about data and taking ownership of data versus really being focused on the applications, can you get into, Gary, what type of data are you talking about? Are you talking about?
Yeah, no, I mean it's everything you can possibly imagine, right? So it's certainly, sort of that it's the demographic data, it's the personal information, what are they doing, what are their objectives, what are their families, interested in, what are their time horizons in terms of investment, what's their risk tolerances, what's happening in the market that might impact, their portfolio, that maybe I need to rebalance it in certain ways or hedge them in certain ways. It's a ton of all that data, and there's just gobs and gobs and gobs of it, that are coming out at a furious pace, and no human alive can handle it. And this is where again, AI is going to be able to sort of take this multifarious data from all these disparate sources, bring them together in a logical way that helps you understand and generate insights around your client and what their objectives are and how you are managing against those objectives and what you may need to do better to manage against those objectives. And again, this is part of sort of the proactive process that I mentioned earlier, rather than being reactive. Oh, the market crashed, what do I do? Right? It's really trying to identify, here's your exposures, how we're going to protect you against, potential downturn in that particular industry or segment or sector, whatever it is you're in, and here's how we're going to diversify you, but also focus again on all the things that you have in terms of your objectives. It's really it's delivering objective-driven investing at scale that's never been seen before, and that's a huge change in the way the industry has functioned.
Those of you who are familiar, Knomee is all about including the client as a source of data, helping the client articulate what is most important to them as it relates to connecting deeper with them. And this can happen at the point of prospecting, onboarding, preparing for a review meeting, succession, M&A, at all of those moments in the life cycle of both the client and the advisor. The need to understand, what is the client feeling? What are they actually, how do they envision their future? What are they going through? And how do I make sure that everything I'm saying to them resonates? It's in their own words. It makes them feel like I understand them. I've heard them. I recognize where they are, and I can guide them into the future. So where we come in, where Knomee's kind of nuanced approach is go get it straight from the horse's mouth. They may not know how to articulate it. They may not know what information is most relevant to share with you. And as I mentioned, one advisor has said to us, I feel like my clients say what they think I want to hear, which is not serving me as their advisor. I don't want them to be breaking their brain over what I want to hear. I want to hear what they're actually feeling. And I want to hear the differences between the two partners. I want to understand how he's feeling, how she's feeling. Many advisors, in fact, I did a webinar this morning, and this person I was on the panel with said he loves his advisor. His wife doesn't. And that every time they meet, he's got this whole slew of questions that he likes to ask, and he likes to get into the Monte Carlo simulations and the measuring against expectations. That's not the conversation his wife wants to have at all. She'd rather not even be in the room. She would much rather talk about her emotions and how she's planning for her family and what's really important to her to experience more fulfillment and meaning and purpose in the way that she's living her life. And so recognizing those two differences is really critical. And it's a totally different set of data. Can it be supported by AI? Sure, but only if it's captured. And only if there's a place that it lives and breathes and is updated and maintained and is accurate and managed in terms of the permissions and who may see it and who may not, going back to compliance. And so if it doesn't exist and it only exists in your head, you can't use it. You can't use it to scale your business. Go ahead, Gary. You were going to say something.
Yeah, no, data science, right? Data science is exactly that. Data science is about deriving new insights from data and patterns that you see in that data that you may not have seen before, right? And the more of the data that you collect, the more robust and compelling those insights may be. And frankly, the more statistically significant they'll be as well, right? And so that's why that data estate, that data architecture, whether it's data you're generating internally, whether it's data you're sourcing externally, but the way in which you bring it all together for analysis is going to be a critical differentiator for advisors going forward. I mean, this is going to be the ones who do it really well are going to be the winners. The ones who don't do it very well or don't try to do it at all, I think eventually are going to be cannibalized. That's the reality.
We heard a lot today about personalization. I'm curious to understand, in your business, what does that mean? What is it that you're trying to deliver? And for what end? Going back to your point, Gary, I thought it was a really good point that AI is powering outcomes. What are the outcomes and how are they measured? Like, how is the success of those outcomes measured?
I mean, I guess my biggest concern is that, is not the industry, or people have a perception of the wealth management industry. And, everything that we try to do, you mentioned the concept of tipping point. Will there be a tipping point, and will the public embrace what it is? Because as difficult it is for us to become focused on the personal side, it's also just as vulnerable on behalf of clients. And so, I just wonder that, it takes so long for the industry to change. And maybe AI can be the impetus to that, to the extent it can help with capacity, and it helps with automation, and it makes things easier to do. The challenge is, then what do advisors do to fill that time up? What do they do?
I think you probably do more productive things than some of the exercises you're doing before meetings and things like that, right? So,
But what are those productive things?
well, I think it's helping the client achieve their objectives at the end of the day, right? It's you think of yourself as sort of the editor-in-chief of all the decisions that can be made around fulfilling that client's wealth requirements. And AI is there as a tool to provide more guidance and insight to you about, hey, here's what's happening, here's what might happen, here's how this could affect this particular client's objectives, and then it's up to you to really have those conversations and to really assess that. I mean, the one thing about AI as well that we didn't discuss is its propensity to hallucinate. And so it can make up the things that sound very compelling and factual when in fact they're not. And a lot of that is a byproduct of the data. And it also means that, the person who's driving the machine at the end of the day needs to have the domain expertise, needs to be able, to put it mildly, to call bullshit on what the model is producing, to basically make sure that you can sort of, move through the stuff that's helpful and retract the stuff that is not. And so that's a lot of the opportunity, I think, is to sort of reclaim your day, really focusing on the client and less on the tasks.
Yeah, but even when you go to the side of personal attention, client experience, all things that you say, which I totally agree with, yeah, we're still charging them on assets under management.
Yeah.
How do you link that?
So Frank, I've got like some anecdotes just from advisors we've spoken with and from what we've learned from family offices and ultra high net worth and how that level of service can scale down. And so some of what we've heard is that the more you know, the bigger the menu can be. And so what can that mean? It is, okay, if I'm automating the portfolio allocation, I might even be automating, hey, this is the right time to introduce an insurance policy or an estate plan update, or introducing allocation to alternatives. Those are all kind of core components of what advice is. What I've heard from some advisors is, I actually didn't realize that they are shopping around for a long-term care facility for their parent or for themselves. And it is extending the service into those types of non-financial, help me live a better life and make this big financial decision by getting into those tentacles that are outside the industry.
Yeah, I think those affinity benefits do mean a lot actually to people at the end of the day. I would use a parallel in a completely different industry, right? So look at the management consulting industry right now. And those models operationally have been built on basically a premise that I can bring in relatively junior talent to implement, a client's consulting requirements to do the delivery of whatever that project happens to be, and I'm going to margin the hell out of them. And so what's happened is that a lot of those junior resources, if you've been paying any attention to what's happening in the consulting world, and this includes the likes of some of the biggest shops, EY, Accenture, others, right? They are beginning to see a real pullback from that type of model because clients are beginning to realize, wait a minute, why am I paying a premium for basically some kid who's green to come in, learn on my dime, and I'm paying a 60+% margin, on that, on top of it, when a lot of this information I can source for myself from AI. And so what's happening in that industry is that a lot of these firms are beginning to evaluate their operating models. They're basically saying, instead of working off of the T&M type of model, which is akin to sort of the AUM type of model, right? I'm going to start working on more of an objective driven model, which is, results oriented. When I deliver this is what it's going to cost. Somewhat more similar to a fixed price type of engagement. But so they're starting to adapt based on client expectations and requirements, and because they see the handwriting on the wall based on a model that's worked for them for very, very long, and they made a ton of money doing it, but it's no longer going to be something they can continue to do. And so I think a lot of it is going to be, within the wealth world, I think some of it will increasingly move more towards performance based rather than AUM.
In someone's lifetime, I guess.
Well, I think this is an opportunity in my view. This is the opportunity to sort of, you've got these big wirehouse shops that are very, very heavily AUM driven. That's why I said that the business has largely deteriorated into an asset gathering exercise rather than an asset management exercise. But for those smaller RIAs, those more individual RIAs that really can deliver that high level of service, and align performance isn't always going to be positive. Sometimes it's going to be negative. But as long as you are working with the client so that they understand what the risk reward profile looks like, how it's aligned with their objectives, I think that's a huge differentiator for some of the independents to basically go to market and say, hey, we're going to be aligned. Our success is going to be aligned with your success, and let the wirehouses eventually, they'll have to come along. But I just think that's going to be a huge way to differentiate yourselves, to be honest.
I think that my 2 cents on that is, I think that has been what the fiduciary model has promised all along. It is because we're being paid on AUM, your success is my success. I think for some scenarios that's true, for some it's not. I can tell you when I was a private banker and I managed high net worth individuals who made one transaction a year, paying a percent is pretty rich for the level of service that I was giving them. Their success is not my success just because of the business model we're in. Their success is my success when I actually know how they're defining value and how I'm helping them achieve it. How I recognize that what they really want is to take an extra vacation this year. And it's going to have a budget of, $100,000. And we achieved that goal. We got them to that extra vacation at $100,000. They didn't even have to think about it. We got there. That to me is alignment of success and getting down to the nitty gritty of what is the goal, what is driving you to the goal, and how am I motivating behavior change to help you save toward that goal.
Yeah, solutions orientation, right? Not product orientation. That's the main takeaway there too, right? You don't want to just hawk products to them. You really want to be aligned with the solutions, and the solutions are exactly how do I live a better life? How do I achieve what it is that I'm trying to achieve for me and my family? That's solutioning.
I like the comment here in the chat from Arthur that the agent is the one that mines the ore and the human is getting the raw diamond, out of it. I think that very neatly aligns to what the analogy to management consulting, Gary, where you've got kind of a tool that is helping you find all of the pieces and working through the machine so that the human can then figure out, well, now let me actually take the action that this is helping surface to me in context at the right time, in the right way, in this trusted environment.
Well, we had a bunch of folks early on, Marla, when we asked, I think in the first poll, what are you looking for out of AI? And a lot of them really were talking about productivity gains, in some way, shape, or form, right? And, so the more you can turn the machine towards those sort of, more task-oriented, less strategic types of functions, and let them do all the gathering for you, and then you can bring that to the client, with more of that relationship and that educated experience that the machine may lack, and that personal touch. That's, I think, the way in which it's going to work right now.
Well, I want to start to wrap up and ask one more poll, which is to share with you that this Wealth Leadership Roundtable that Knomee sponsors is quarterly. We bring in fantastic speakers from every part of our industry and beyond, and we talk about the future of wealth. We talk about what you need to know about as a practitioner, as a business owner, as a planner, so that you can deliver better, more personalized solutions to your clients in real time. So the last poll is, do you want to be included in our next quarterly roundtable? We would love to have you. We'll continue to send out invites via email and on LinkedIn. But this is a really critical gathering of the leading thinkers and the leading practitioners in our industry. I also want to end this call by reminding everyone that you can find out more about Knomee at knomee.com, and that we have a free trial for advisors that we launched about a month and a half ago, where advisors can test it out, use it with 5 clients over a month, and see what it's like to guide people on a journey to share the type of information that is going to enable personalization at scale. It's going to document what historically has not been documented often, and certainly not consistently. We're creating consistency in a process that will help actually drive much, much, much better value and a higher bar of trust and engagement between the advisor and their clients. Gary, where can everyone find more about CAMP and learn more about enterprise AI infrastructure and what you're building?
Yeah, so you can go to 4camp, number 4, camp, like you're going camping, .ai. And we have a webpage that's up there right now, which is going to be replaced soon. We are still getting a lot of our marketing together, as I was sharing with Marla before the call. And we provide, again, we have an Agentic AI orchestration platform that can bring together all of those data assets in a secure way that we were talking about, can take all of your institutional knowledge, and commit it to very secure memory, so you can reference it in different types of natural language queries that can be used in workflows. And it's basically a no-code visual drag and drop type of tool to bring all this stuff together between AI agents and the tools that you use today. And then we also offer consulting services around that as well, to help firms navigate some of the AI strategy and their requirements and ultimately delivery. So if we can be of any help, I'd encourage you to please reach out again to the forcamp.ai website. We're on LinkedIn, or you can ping me directly from the chat below that Emily shared.
I want to thank everyone and end immediately on time. It's 11 o'clock here on the West Coast. And I want to welcome you to continue the conversation. Reach out to me, reach out to Gary. We are here to help you deliver a better service, build a better business, and figure out how you embrace technology to do that. So thank you for taking an hour out of your day today and being here with us. We're delighted that you joined us, and we look forward to seeing you next quarter.